listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change. Yeah, never a dull moment, folks. But let me get to that. Let me give you a bit of backdrop. So over the last few podcasts, I've been talking about the issue of love and when love goes wrong and when love really goes wrong. And I think this is not just important in terms of intimate relationships between two people, partners, marriages, and so on, but I think we've got to give some thought to this in the broader context, because if I go back to the issue of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, this has had a massive impact on many, many, many people. And so, it started me thinking about, okay, so I've done those three podcasts. What's next? And I was actually almost sort of at a bit of a loss. And I know that might sound strange because I don't think there's ever, nothing to talk about. The question is, how do I make this flow? How do I weave it in? And how do I bring concepts together that are actually relatively complex, but in a simple and understandable manner? Not everyone's got, a master's degree or a doctorate in sociology, psychology, anthropology, or whatever it is. Okay? And I think that those of us who've got higher levels of education, it's our job, our duty, our responsibility to be able to present the sort of stuff that we work with in a much, much more readily understandable way. One of the things that really irritated me in philosophy was, the way that professional philosophers construct, the material. And half the time you'd be sitting there going, what's he actually saying, or she's actually saying? And then you go, oh, hang on a minute, this is actually really straightforward if you strip out all the gobbledygook. And some people, especially in psychology and in personal growth in the new age environment, are still pretty good at making simple ideas look really complicated. Usually, and I know this is going to sound judgy, but it makes them look smart. Now, if you're really confident in your intelligence, you don't need to resort to that. You don't need to, try and persuade directly or indirectly other people that you're really bright or brilliant. So having said that, as I was sort of, rolling things around in my head and doing a little bit of research, and, YouTube's always an interesting little source of information tidbits. You've got to be careful, like with everything on the internet. My wife gave me an interesting article. And it was an article written by a woman called Erica Stonestreet, who's an associate professor of philosophy at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University in Minnesota. Now, essentially, the title of the article was, "Are we too quick these days to break off relationships?" And so my first reaction was, oh, well, that's actually, a nice sort of flow on. And then when I started reading the article, I clicked to a couple really, really important issues. Two in particular. The first one was about ghosting, and the second one was all about the sort of whole cancel culture thing. And she came from a very personal experience where a friend of hers, or at least she interpreted that a friend of hers who felt hurt by something she had said had basically put into the email, "No need to reply." And Erica Stonestreet took that fundamentally as, oh, okay, I've been cancelled. Okay. So what is this article ultimately really, really about? And it got to the point where the message was about harmony. And I thought, oh, this is fantastic. Partly because it's not something that we generally talk about. And when I talk about loving relationships, part of that is it's almost implied that there is harmony within that relationship. And then when we talk about when love really goes wrong, when love goes wrong, there is disharmony. Okay? So in both psychology and philosophy, this is a concept that's not necessarily very deeply explored. So why put it into the context of ghosting and the cancel culture? Okay, so let me work up to that. So fundamentally, ghosting it's a new, sort of relatively new term that refers to abruptly cutting off contact with someone without giving that person any warning or explanation for doing so. In a lot of intimate relationships, it's actually called stonewalling. So I will just ignore my partner for however long I choose to do that. Now, in my book, that's a pretty shitty thing to do because usually the partner often doesn't know what they've done wrong, or if they think they do know what they've done wrong, they don't get an opportunity, an avenue to get into conversation, into dialogue with their partner about how they can sort this out. And I think that that's manipulative. Okay, what about cancel culture? So, it's been one of those words like woke, right? Which in my view are fundamentally combative concepts or terms, okay? So in cancel culture, we try to cancel a thing that we perceive to have done us harm, right? But it's a lot more complicated than that. It's not that simple. And the reason why I refer to cancel culture, ghosting, and wokeism fundamentally as combative, concepts and attitudes is that it is extraordinarily individualistic and often based on a certain sense of entitlement. Now, I also want to make the point here that, when we talk about historical issues, say, for example, like racism, sexism, and so on, it doesn't mean that we can't acknowledge the badness of it, but we also don't want to whitewash it. We don't. Interesting term in that context, isn't it? We don't want to censor things out. This is about, ultimately learning from our experience is how to move forward. Okay, so if I give you a quick definition or framework for cancel culture, it's usually to identify and become aware of transgressions. Now, I don't have a problem with that, except in a healthy relationship, in a mature relationship, I'm going to be wanting to talk that out with the person on the other side. I just don't want to cut them off. It's also partly to do with experiencing strong negative emotions. Okay, again, still not a problem. But the question is, how do I resolve my own strong negative emotion? Okay, and in this process, there are two emerging concepts that I think are important to recognize. One is I need a certain level of maturity, and I need a very strong degree of empathy. Okay, because the other part of the whole cancel culture thing is that we then act punitively and visibly to harm the transgressor. So again, that really raises some issues. Okay, what do I do with that stuff historically? Do I, smash statues, or do I remove books? All of these things. Now, I'm not suggesting that we keep harmful things simply because of what they are. What I'm talking about is using those harmful things to educate the next generation about not what to do. It's a bit like, why when we visit Auschwitz or Dachau, we go there, to engage with the horror of what happened so that it will never happen again. The whole idea of never again. So what let's get more into what are the problems with these concepts like ghosting, wokeism, and cancel culture. And again, I'll come back to this thing. It's based on the individual's rights usurping that of somebody else, either individually or collectively, because there is a collectivism in the I. Okay. Now, let me get back to this article because I think it's a brilliant article, and if you have an opportunity to check it out on Philosophy Now, it's really worthwhile reading. And so, what is it that ultimately we should be looking for and encouraging and nurturing in our culture? And that is, the idea of harmony, right? And harmony is a bit like, a good a cappella group. Music, we always talk about harmony. The harmony between strings, chords, notes, all that sort of thing, okay? And I can use that as a metaphor for society as a whole, right? Because societies consist of different strings, as it were, whether that be families, communities, culture, whatever, okay? How do we really make those work? And the way that we make them work is to have, fundamental ideas, values that, for example, are inclusive. So we don't go, you're this, therefore you have no place in my relationship with myself and my group. That's not how society is ultimately going to work, is it? So in the article, she speaks about harmony being primarily about maintaining flourishing relationships in the face of inevitable friction, slip-ups, blunders and disagreements. Okay? Really important. Right? So why is this particular week so interesting again? Because an extension of what has been happening for the last few months, i.e. like Russia trying to cancel the Ukraine, okay, if I'm going to use that word. But now what we've got is the United States Supreme Court trying to cancel women's rights. And this is not just about abortion. If they get through with this the way that they want to, it will set up a set of dominoes falling about the boundary between privacy, individual rights, dictated by a minority. Okay, so what does Erica talk about also in regard to harmony? Well, she says that harmony requires the constant tuning of relationships. Okay, so we progressively working in it. It's like you don't tune a guitar and then never touch it again. You never, you can play it, but you've got to keep tuning it. And it's about everyone being heard and valued, respected, but also that everybody is held accountable for their actions so that we can arrive at livable compromises. Because that's what makes a culture work. Ancient Rome wasn't just Romans. We talk about, the Empire of Rome and it's the Romans. Rome was an extraordinarily complex, multicultural environment that was very religiously tolerant. I mean, as long as you paid respect to the Roman gods and the pantheon of their gods, you could practice whatever you liked, basically. It's just you had to also pay tax, right? Interesting idea there. The other thing Erica Stone Street talks about is that harmony is not about suppressing legitimate feelings. It's about tuning feelings so that they're appropriate to the situation. And this is where the whole topic comes into contact with other topics that I've spoken about, like emotional maturity. So to me, the idea of using wokeism, which is really about seeking social justice, as a battle cry to put the other person down, you're just woke, is completely inappropriate. It has really no place in any form of collective discourse towards moving to understanding each other, like the Romans who built, an empire that, was so diverse, but they had one vision: make the Roman Empire, the Roman Republic, as far spread as possible, a world-dominating empire. Those historians and archaeologists out there, please forgive my lack of specificity with terms at this point in time. Just go with the sentiment. So, if we're going to really achieve harmony, then we need to practice empathy, and we need to focus individually on our emotional maturity so that we can operate better collectively. So that it's not about dominance, control, and fear. That it is, like Aristotle says, that we as a people into government have the best interest for the whole society at heart, for the long term, not in the short term, not just for some sections, some groups, some religions, some ideologies. This is an antithesis to what democracy is really about. So again, one of the problems that I have currently with what's happening in the United States is the democracy that they profess to have is being assailed, like the Ukraine, by Russia, except in the United States, it's by the ultra-right. And they don't need to necessarily be that ultra, right? It's that religious level of conservatism that gets, into a democratic process and begins to erode it like a cancer. And I'm going to call it what it is. This is nonsense. There is absolutely no rational, reasonable, objective foundation to do some of the things that are occurring under this banner of, whatever they want to call it. It's just unacceptable. Women have a right over their body. If they don't, they have no rights fundamentally. Everything else is just a play of words. And this is where I come into it, that we as men need to stand up with women about protecting this, because in doing so, we're not protecting simply a woman's rights. We're protecting the rights of the community, the rights of the society, the rights of the nation as a whole, healthy, inclusive, collaborative environment where people have the opportunity to thrive instead of being assailed by archaic 7th century ideas. It stops being appropriate right then and there. So collectively, whether you are a man or a woman, this is an issue amongst many issues at the moment, where we need to come together and collectively challenge the minorities who have somehow usurped control and influence. And part of that is the erosion of accountabilities. So in a harmonious relationship, I'm accountable for my behaviour. I'm accountable for what, I do with what I think and feel. It's fundamentally important that we accept this as an humanistic function. If we're going to have a society that isn't abusive, toxic, and dangerous, we need to get this together. So yes, some of you might go, well, it's a bit of a long string between Russia and what's going on in the United States. No, it's not. Conservatism and what's going on within the Russia Federation, it's a lot more closely aligned in many respects than what you might think. And part of that erosion also takes place because we've eroded the concept, the idea of accountability. And harmony always brings with it accountability. My willingness to put my hand up and go, you know what, honey, I'm wrong. Or I can see how you feel about that. Not sure that I agree with necessarily what the position and that you've got, but I agree that I have hurt your feelings and that I look to making amends for that. In Hawaiian culture, there's a very interesting concept of ho'oponopono, which is to make right. And I think we need to take maybe a leaf out of the Hawaiian tradition about encouraging to do this. You know, many indigenous cultures have been able to do and formalize, ritualize a we ethic. You know, a term that was coined by Dr. Viola F. Cordova. She was the first North American indigenous woman to earn a doctorate in philosophy. Okay, so she wrote a book, Ethics, The We and the I, and I think it's really, really worthwhile doing some reading around this sort of stuff. Doesn't matter whether you've got a college degree or university degree or not. Some of this stuff is actually not that difficult. Get into it, because the survival of our culture and society depends on it. The stuff that we're being told we should be paying attention to is generally, from the conservative bench, a nonsense. You know, the whole bit about family values and blah, blah, blah. I'm the first one to put up my hand for family values, but not the way that they describe it. And I always find it really ironic that these people who profess to have that at heart often are the biggest transgressors. They have, affairs, they abuse children, not all of them. Okay, get me wrong, I'm getting a bit on a roll here, but, the propensity of misdemeanors and often criminal behaviour amongst those who profess too strongly that position is quite astounding. And I don't think it's an accident. So on that very passionate note, I'm going to sign off this week. So the moral, look at ways in which you can create harmony rather than discord. I bet you all of you are musicians are going to be tuning your guitars, ukuleles, drums, or whatever it is, because you're not going to play something that's out of tune. Until next time, this is me signing off.
Thank you for listening to Inspired Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual and group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.